What's up? It's your Herb Daddy. This is going to be my first video in an A to Z series to explore medicinal plant chemistry. I think it'll be fun to get through an alphabet of constituents, and it will allow us to get to know some important concepts of natural products chemistry. Some constituents will require a deeper dive than others, but we'll just go with the flow and have fun with it. Fair warning, I'm not going to shy away from chemistry in these videos. If it feels a bit heavy on this first go-around, that's okay. Just stick with it. You'll slowly start to put the pieces together as we work through the alphabet of constituents. Feel free to comment your questions, and I'll do my best to address them in the comments or in future videos. First up is a fairly common constituent, but you may not have heard of it. Aucubin. Aucubin gets its name from Aucuba japonica in the Garryaceae family, where it was first discovered. But for most herbalists, we mostly come across Aucubin in plants from the Plantaginaceae, Scrophulariaceae, and Orobanchaceae families. Plant friends such as Plantago, Scrophula, Verbascum, and Euphrasia, aka plantain, figwort, mullein, and eyebright. This constituent caught my attention because it has a lot of interesting potential, but it hasn't been studied in humans. A constituent that may protect the liver, prevent neurodegeneration, decrease inflammation, and protect our joints, all without any apparent toxicity? Sounds promising to me, so let's unpack Aucubin. Aucubin is in a class of compounds known as iridoids. Iridoids are derivatives of monoterpenes, think essential oils, and are made from geranyl pyrophosphate in the mevalonate pathway. The mevalonate pathway is one of 4 or 5 major pathways used to make medicinal compounds. In actuality, the mevalonate pathway is kind of a short for 2 pathways. Depending on the constituent, the mevalonate pathway or the methyl erythritol phosphate pathway are used, but there's crosstalk between them, so we can lump them together. Either way, the result of these pathways is an enormous group of constituents known as terpenoids. Terpenoids range in size from 5 carbons all the way up to 40 carbons in the tetraterpenoids, or carotenoids. One distinguishing feature of the constituents made in these pathways is that their core structure always contains carbons in a multiple of 5. So, iridoids are made in the mevalonate pathway and are derived from monoterpenes, which are 10-carbon structures. Iridoids are characterized by having a cyclopentanopiran skeleton. That sounds mysterious, but it's easy to break down. Cyclo means ring, penta means 5. So we start with a 5-carbon ring. And then pyran is basically shorthand for a cyclic ether with 6 atoms in the ring. In some iridoids, the pyran is a delta lactone, a cyclic ester, but not always. We can break down lactones in another video. In plants, iridoids usually occur as glycosides, which means they have a sugar attached, and in the case of Aucubin, this is a single glucose molecule. Iridoids as a whole are known for being very bitter compounds to mammals, including us, so they probably act as deterrents for herbivores. But they also have other defensive roles to play in plants, like protection from microorganisms. Aucubin and its close chemical relative, catalpol, are 2 of the most common iridoids and can be found in many different plant families. The fact that they're so prevalent suggests this is an effective chemical strategy for plants to adopt. Incidentally, the term iridoid comes from the ant genus Iridomyrmex. This is an Australian ant genus, which we first discovered these types of compounds. They secrete iridoids as defense molecules. Let's look at the specific chemistry of Aucubin, and then we can talk about its effects. Aucubin is a relatively fragile iridoid, and it can undergo some transformations when it's extracted or taken as medicine. First of all, it has a fairly weak glycosidic bond, which is sensitive to acid environments. Think pH less than 3. The glycosidic link will hydrolyze and liberate aucubigenin, and a glucose molecule. In biological systems, aucubigenin is probably the main active component because glycosides just aren't absorbed very well, because the sugars are very polar. This is a common theme with glycosides. You usually have to break off the sugar for a constituent to be absorbed and be active. In most cases, this requires our gut microbiota to break the bond, but in some cases, like Aucubin, the bond can be broken by the acid conditions of our stomach, which is at a pH of 1 or less. Aucubigenin has some other tricks up its sleeve too. When aucubigenin is in a water environment, it can spontaneously bounce between a hemiacetal and a dialdehyde form. If it stays in acidic conditions, it can also rearrange into a third form, which you can see here. So we need to keep all of this in mind when we administer Aucubin. It's not clear which of these forms is exerting a biological effect, but honestly, that's true for a lot of drug compounds. So how does Aucubin fare as a medicinal compound? The majority of the information we have about Aucubin is from preclinical research, meaning in vitro and animal studies. This doesn't guarantee that we will see the same activities in humans. However, if we extrapolate to a traditional knowledge of plants that contain significant amounts of Aucubin, there's a strong agreement with preclinical data, so I feel like we're on the right track. Still, some human research would be great. All that being said, this is a fairly well-researched constituent. I'm not going to be exhaustive here, just highlight what I find interesting about Aucubin. There's a couple of good literature reviews out there that I've linked in the description if you want to dive deeper. Reading through the literature, there's a couple of biochemical pathways that really stand out with Aucubin: NFkB and NRF2. In short, Aucubin decreases NFkB activation and increases NRF2. With NFkB, the exact target isn't known, but researchers have observed decreased inhibitory kappa B alpha subunit phosphorylation and degradation, which suggests that this is modulating this pathway upstream from there. A few studies found that Aucubin may be working through the HMGB1 toll-like receptor 4 pathway for NFkB activation. I'll let you dig deeper into what that means on your own. For now, just know that Aucubin inhibits NFkB activation. Inhibiting NFkB is significant in many disease states, but most especially in inflammation. NFkB acts as a transcription factor and is one of the major controllers of inflammation in the body. As a transcription factor, it increases the expression of numerous inflammatory players, most especially cyclooxygenase 2, TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and interleukin-6. Cyclooxygenase 2 goes on to make pro-inflammatory cytokines, and TNF-alpha, interleukin-1 beta, and interleukin-6 help to propagate the inflammatory cascade and activate surrounding cells and immune cells, essentially feeding the fires of inflammation. In numerous models, we see decreased activation of NFkB with Aucubin. NFkB is a common target for a lot of natural compounds, so we'll have many opportunities to dive deeper into this pathway. As a student of natural products, this is a good one to know. NRF2, or nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2, that's a mouthful, is a slightly different character. It is also a transcription factor, but instead of promoting inflammation, NRF2 puts cells into a defensive and detoxifying state. NRF2 activation causes the cell to make more of its antioxidant machinery and supports the production of primary cellular antioxidants glutathione and thioredoxin. Basically, NRF2 helps the cell deal with oxidative stress and encourages xenobiotic metabolism, the processing of foreign molecules. Aucubin appears to activate NRF2 through an AMPK-dependent pathway. NRF2 is another pathway to know, and we will definitely be revisiting it with other constituents. With Aucubin, the evidence strongly supports NRF2 activation, and in one study, NRF2 knockout mice didn't receive as much benefit from Aucubin, which really helps to solidify the role of NRF2 in Aucubin's therapeutic effects. The combination of NFkB inhibition and NRF2 activation makes Aucubin a very interesting compound in the context of chronic and degenerative diseases. These pathways are implicated in Aucubin's ability to help protect the liver, lungs, kidneys, heart, eyes, brain, bones, and so on. Of course, this is all in preclinical models. Still, take a look at all the potential effects Aucubin has shown. Aucubin may also be directly useful in allergic reactions. Aucubin reduced the secretion of inflammatory cytokines from antigen-stimulated rat mast cells. In simpler terms, Aucubin helped to decrease cytokine release when rats were exposed to an allergen. This supports the traditional use of the Aucubin-rich plant Plantago, which is used topically to soothe bug bites, wounds, and irritations, but also internally to help lessen allergy symptoms. Speaking of plantain, If you want to experience Aucubin for yourself, I'm willing to bet you have an opportunity in your neighborhood. What I'm talking about is this plant here, which is Plantago major, or broadleaf plantain, or greater plantain. You'll notice it has these broad leaves with prominent venation on the back. It also throws up these tall, thin spike inflorescences, which eventually get filled with seeds that the birds love and are also full of mucilage. In fact, a related species, Plantago ovata, is the psyllium fiber that you buy at the supermarket for supplementary fiber. Maybe we'll talk about that plant in the future. Plantago gets its name from planta, which is Latin for feet, and that's because it's found basically everywhere that humans walk. And in fact, in North America here, it got the nickname of white man's footprint, because as Europeans moved into North America, this plant started to pop up everywhere white man did. So now it's basically everywhere in the world, especially here in the Northern Hemisphere. So again, I'm willing to bet you can find a leaf. If you do, make sure that it's clean, because it grows where we walk. That means it also grows where pets walk, and you don't want to sample a leaf that's got animal droppings on it. But if you find a clean leaf, go ahead and take a little nibble. You'll notice that it's bitter. That's the iridoids that we're talking about, like Aucubin. In dried plantain leaf, Aucubin's about 0.2 to 0.4% of the dry weight, so it's not an enormous amount, but you can still taste it. But chewing on some leaf gives you the opportunity to do one of the traditional uses of plantain, which is a spit poultice. It's not very glamorous, but you take some leaf, you chew it up a bit. You take that chewed up leaf and then you place it on a bug bite, or if you had a sliver or a wound with some pus in it. And plantain traditionally is a drying agent, so it helps to dry out the infection, helps to dry out the sliver, and it will also soothe the inflammation and itchiness of the bug bite. So just let it sit on there for a while, maybe replace it a few times. You'll get a little dose of Aucubin every time you do, and eventually it'll calm down the itchiness and make the bug bite feel better. I'll also come out and take a clean leaf and just chew it up and swallow it if my allergies are acting up. Because as I just talked about, Aucubin helps to calm down our mast cells so they release less histamine. And I found personally, and this is my personal experience, that Plantago is useful for that. If you don't find the broadleaf plantain, you might be able to find a close relative, which I happen to have in my garden over here as well. Other option you might find is Plantago lanceolata, or ribwort plantain. So it's got much longer leaves, still has the prominent veins. This is a special variety that's got a variegation. You'll probably find it with just normal green leaves. But it also makes these tall inflorescences that will eventually flower and ripen into seeds again. So keep an eye out in your neighborhood for Plantago major or Plantago lanceolata. One final cool thing about Aucubin is that it may help to protect against mushroom toxicity. Aucubin was shown to offer significant protection to mice and dogs exposed to alpha-amanitin, the poison in death cap mushrooms. Aucubin may compete with alpha-amanitin at RNA polymerase and preserve enough of its activity that fatal toxicity is avoided. Aucubin may also displace alpha-amanitin from albumin and encourage excretion, helping to clear the poison from the body more quickly. The antidotal effect was only observed with intraperitoneal injection and not orally. Still, it seems like this might be worth investigating, considering the slew of deaths we've recently had from people accidentally consuming amanita mushrooms. And to top it off, toxicity studies haven't really found an upper limit for Aucubin, at least in mice. So in that model, it is extremely safe. And to date, there's no evidence that it's overtly toxic to humans either, based on traditional use. As you can see, there's a lot of potential with Aucubin as a medicinal compound. I would really love to see some human clinical studies performed to see if this potential is relevant to humans. For now, we can at least use preclinical research to help us understand the medicinal plants that contain Aucubin. That being said, there are some barriers to the use of Aucubin as a therapeutic due to its chemistry. First, it's relatively fragile, and extraction and purification can degrade it, but there are some ways to protect it. First, use cold, dark, weak acid conditions to help stabilize Aucubin, and stability in whole plant extracts is improved. Second, remember it's water-soluble, but prone to oxidation. It's also soluble in ethanol, so tinctures are a good option. My recommendation to herbalists trying to emphasize Aucubin would be to tincture fresh plant material and add a small amount of a weak acid like vinegar or citric acid. The second factor is that it has relatively short half-life in the models tested, which means it would need frequent application and dosing. And finally, many of the positive studies used IP injection, so it's unclear if these effects would translate to oral ingestion of an herb containing Aucubin. None of that is the end of the world for Aucubin, it just helps to inform us on how to properly use plants that contain it. I hope that you'll agree that there seems to be some promise here, and I hope we will see some human studies soon. That's it for Aucubin. Next up is berberine. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when that video gets posted. For now, let me know if you've used plants that contain Aucubin. What have your experiences been? Are they consistent with what we know about this compound? Until next time, herb nerds.